Look at what is happening inside the Pentagon right now. We aren't just talking about a routine Washington political leak. This is a seismic event. The nation's highest military leadership is desperately leaking about how much they do not want to go to war with Iran. When you see identical headlines appearing simultaneously in Axios, the Washington Post, and the Wall Street Journal headlines stating that the president's top generals are warning of the acute risks of a strike, you need to understand that this is a systemic rescue effort. This is what the military calls authorized leaks. They are trying to get their voices on the public record as clearly as possible without breaking the chain of command. Why? Because they see what is happening at the White House and they are terrified. They are trying to build a historical buffer so that when everything collapses, when ballistic missiles start raining down and our aircraft carriers are threatened, they can point to these articles and tell the American people, "We tried to stop him. We warned him this was a terrible idea." Donald Trump immediately fired back on Truth Social, attempting to shut down these leaks by claiming that General Daniel Kane, or Raisin Kane, as he calls him, actually believes this war will be easily won. But don't be fooled by the rhetoric. Trump is trying to box his generals into a political corner, forcing them to play the role of enthusiastic cheerleaders for a cakewalk scenario they know for a fact does not exist. This rift is no longer a secret. It is a flashing red signal that the people who best understand the actual capabilities of the U.S. military are seeing an existential disaster that their commander-in-chief seems to be ignoring for the sake of his ego. We often think of the U.S. military as an entity with infinite resources, a machine that never runs out of ammunition. But tonight, the generals are screaming a completely different truth. We are running dry. Here is the factual number that should make anyone with a strategic mind shudder. In just the recent 12-day war, a conflict where we weren't even officially fully engaged, the United States exhausted 25% of its entire stock of interceptor missiles. You didn't mishear that. 1/4 of our most advanced, most expensive defensive weaponry, things that take years to build, vanished in less than 2 weeks to counter mid-range strikes. Now, do the math for a full-scale war with Iran. Logistics experts at the Pentagon aren't just worried about how many B-2 bombers we have. They are terrified of what happens when Iran goes full send, launching their entire massive ballistic missile inventory. Interceptor systems like the SM-3, THAAD, and Patriot PAC-3 are technological masterpieces, but they aren't mass-produced like sausages. Each of these missiles costs millions of dollars and takes 2 to 3 years to assemble. The generals are pointing to a CSIS war game from 2023. The results back then were already dire. The United States would run out of munitions in just 1 week if forced to confront a major power like China over Taiwan. And folks, the situation in 2026 is far worse. We have drained our stockpiles to aid Ukraine and Israel over the past 4 years. Meanwhile, our defense industrial base hasn't spun up as promised. In fact, production capacity has declined. When Trump declares that everything will be easily won, he is ignoring a fundamental fact. A gun, no matter how modern, is useless without bullets. Experts like Tyler Rogaway have warned that this is a dangerous game. If we burn through our remaining interceptors against Iran, we will be left completely naked against Russia in the East and China in the Pacific. We are trading long-term global security to serve a war of choice for an ego. This isn't an issue of bravery, it's an issue of supply chains. And right now, those supply chains are flashing red. History doesn't repeat itself, but it often rhymes in terrifying ways. And tonight, folks, that rhyme is echoing from the very hallways of the Pentagon. To understand why today's generals are leaking information so desperately, we have to travel back to February of 2003. At that time, General Eric Shinseki, the Army Chief of Staff, stood before Congress and did the unthinkable. He told the truth. He warned that occupying Iraq would require several 100,000 troops, directly contradicting the rosy promises of a cakewalk from the Bush administration. The result? The neocons called him a lunatic. They fired him. They forced him out of office because he dared to spoil their propaganda script. History proved Shinseki right, but the cost was the blood of thousands of American soldiers and trillions of dollars. Tonight, we are witnessing a similar play, but with new actors and a much more dangerous stage. Donald Trump is trying to box General Daniel Kane into that very same trap. Trump claims on social media that Kane believes Iran will be defeated easily. Trump wants to force Kane to step up to the podium and tell the world, "Don't worry, we'll win in a heartbeat." He wants to turn professional warriors into political spokespeople for a military illusion. But listen closely to what the professionals are saying. Men like Dan Kane are not bleeding heart liberals or anti-war activists. Kane is the man who led the Maduro raid in Venezuela. He knows how to use force. But he also knows the difference between a lightning raid and a full-scale war against a nation of 80 million people with rugged, mountainous terrain like Iran. When the people most professional in the use of violence say, "Please, do not make us do this," it is not a question of courage. It is a question of objective reality. Trump is reusing the same playbook from 2003. Figures like Mark Levin are screaming on television that anyone opposing the war is a deep state isolationist. They are trying to label anyone with sound logistical judgment as a traitor. This is an effort to stifle all professional dissent before the first bomb even falls. What is the danger here? It is that when you sideline the generals to listen to political commentators, you are sleepwalking into a disaster. Iran is not an easy target that can be blown away with a few B-2 bombing runs, as Trump describes. It is a nation that has prepared for decades for this exact scenario. They have missile cities buried deep underground and proxy forces across the region ready to set every U.S. base ablaze. The generals are leaking because they do not want to be the new Shinseikis of 2026 people forced into silence before a historical mistake is committed. They want you to know that behind the flashy social media posts about military might lies a stark reality of manpower shortages, munition deficits, and the lack of a viable exit plan. Trump is demanding a cakewalk victory for a second time, but this time, the cost could be the total collapse of the American position in the Middle East. How do you wage a high-tech, large-scale war against Iran if you have nowhere to land your planes or refuel your ships? To attack Iran, the United States relies on a fragile network of Arab allies in the Gulf countries like Qatar, Kuwait, and the United Arab Emirates. These are the locations of our strategic military bases. But tonight, that network is on the verge of total collapse because of one man, the U.S. Ambassador to Israel, Mike Huckabee. While the generals are worried about ballistic missiles, Mike Huckabee is busy causing an irreparable diplomatic disaster. In a shocking interview, he openly supported extremist views, implying that the lands of neighboring countries could belong to Israel. Do you understand the gravity of this? Immediately, Gulf allies called the White House with a single question. Is this official United States policy? Huckabee isn't just talking about theology or personal belief. He is directly dismantling our war infrastructure. Nations like Jordan or the UAE don't let us use their bases out of the goodness of their hearts. They do it because of a delicate political balance. When our ambassador starts speaking like a proponent of territorial expansion, these nations will do the only thing they can to protect themselves. They will shut down the bases. They will say no to allowing American jets to take off from their soil to strike Iran. This is why the generals are leaking to the point of panic. They know that without access to these bases, we would be forced to conduct a war from aircraft carriers thousands of miles away, carriers that are already extremely vulnerable to Iranian missiles. Trump and the neocons may dream of regime change, but Mike Huckabee just took the most important pieces off the board. We are isolating ourselves in a region where we need allies more than ever. Donald Trump wants a war, but his diplomats are ensuring that we will have to fight it alone, without bases, and without an exit strategy. Leave the air-conditioned boardrooms of Washington and step into the lower decks of the USS Gerald R. This is our most modern, most expensive supercarrier, but tonight, it stands as a symbol of the ruthless exhaustion of our people. The crew on this ship has been at sea for 11 straight months. Imagine that. Nearly a year without seeing dry land, without holding their families, all to serve what the military calls deterrent presence. This is the longest deployment for a carrier in decades. But folks, the issue isn't just time. Leaked reports from the Wall Street Journal paint a horrific picture of living conditions inside this floating fortress. The sanitation systems are failing, and raw sewage is reportedly leaking into the sleeping quarters. These young men and women in their early 20s, who signed up with burning enthusiasm, are now living in filth and exhaustion. One sailor put it bluntly, "After this, I'm done. I don't want to be away from my kids for years at a time for aimless plans like this." This isn't just a humanitarian issue. It is a massive national security hole. The generals understand this perfectly. Fatigue leads to fatal errors. We have already seen modern fighter jets slide into the sea during the Houthi operations, not because of enemy fire, but because of operational mistakes made by pilots who were simply too tired. When you force these people to prepare for a total war with Iran while their physical and mental state has hit rock bottom, you are inviting catastrophe. Donald Trump loves the image of his glorious soldiers going into battle so he can feel like a real man based on the actions of others. But he fails to understand that the military is not made of plastic chess pieces. They are flesh and blood. With 15,000 positions already vacant and retention rates in freefall, forcing them into a luxury war just to serve a political ego is a betrayal. We are gambling with the lives of the sailors on the Gerald Ford, not to defend America, but to maintain an illusion of dominance, while the very foundation of the military rots from within. Look at the terrifying emptiness in Washington tonight. When we talk about sleepwalking into disaster, we are talking about an entire political system simultaneously closing its eyes to the clearest of abysses. 23 years ago, when General Eric Shinseki stepped into the light to warn about Iraq, we at least had a debate. We at least had voices of dissent, even if they were later crushed. But folks, in 2026, the silence from Capitol Hill is the loudest noise I have ever heard. Why are the politicians silent? Where are the Democrats? As Donald Trump uses his power to corner the generals, as he turns logistical reports into social media punchlines, we see a total paralysis of checks and balances. Bipartisan lawmakers are either too terrified of Trump's personal attacks, or they are quietly backing this scenario because of the defense contractors lining their pockets. They are leaving the military, the actual professionals, to fight a lonely information war to protect the very survival of this nation. This is the 2003 Iraq playbook, but 10 times more dangerous. Back then, the media and the political establishment worked together to create a propaganda machine that turned lies into indisputable truths. Tonight, Mark Levin and others are doing the same. They are trying to frame this conflict as a moral obligation to protect our children and future generations from the Iranian threat. But ask the sailors on the USS Gerald Ford about the price of that moral obligation while they live in filth, not knowing when they will return home. The biggest issue is that 99% of the American public has no idea how close to the edge we truly are. They are living their daily lives, worrying about gas prices or grocery bills, while their government prepares to light a fuse that could incinerate the entire Middle East. Trump is betting his entire political credibility on a war he believes will bring a rally around the flag effect. He looks at the success of the Maduro raid and believes he can repeat it with a nation that possesses thousands of ballistic missiles and a loyal military force. This is no longer a partisan issue. It is an issue of sanity. When we let political commentators dictate military strategy instead of generals, when we stay silent as our soldiers are worked to the point of exhaustion, we are tearing apart the foundation of our own strength. People like Ro Khanna or Thomas Massie are trying to speak up, but their voices are like cries in the wilderness. Washington is sleepwalking. And folks, the coming fall won't just be a policy error, it will be a historical catastrophe that the next generation will ask, why did no one stop when the signs were flashing red? Let me leave you with one final image tonight. Imagine an hourglass running out, but instead of sand, it is filled with SM-3 interceptor missiles, the fuel tanks of the USS Gerald Ford, and the shred of remaining trust between a president and his military commanders. Donald Trump believes he can bend reality with his will. He believes that if he says easily won enough times on social media, the logistical reality will somehow align itself. But folks, war does not operate on the truth social algorithm. War operates on the gravity of mathematics and the brutality of physics. When the top general's men who have spent their entire lives studying how to destroy targets say we are out of ammo, that our soldiers are exhausted, and that we are losing our strategic bases. That is not the deep state resisting. That is reality knocking on the White House door. We are standing at a historical crossroads. We saw this playbook in Iraq. We saw it in the failed wars of the past, but this time the stakes are unique. We are gambling our entire national security, gambling the lives of tens of thousands of sailors living in squalor at sea, all to serve an illusion of absolute dominance. Trump wants a flashy victory to cover up weak economic numbers and internal scandals, but the price could be the total collapse of the United States deterrence system globally. When you wake up tomorrow morning, remember that the Pentagon leaks we discussed tonight are the final alarm bells. They are a plea for sanity from the ultimate professionals, directed at a system that is sleepwalking. If we ignore the generals, if we let political commentators move chess pieces made of flesh and blood, then when the disaster hits, we cannot say we weren't warned. The gravity of math always wins. And folks, the fall from a power-mad illusion is always the hardest.